Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We have a really exciting topic, and I personally can't wait to dig into this. My name is Brian Pagano. I'm the VP of Digital Success over at Apigee, coming to you this morning from Apigee's intergalactic headquarters in San Jose, California. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague from the other side of the continent this morning, Peter. Peter, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Peter Wannemacher. I'm a senior analyst at Forrester. My team is the e-business and channel strategy team, but for the purposes of today and almost all of my conversations, I am one of the leads on our research into digital strategy in financial services.
Fantastic. So we're going to predict the future today. We don't often do that because it's very difficult. It burns a lot of calories. But we're going to talk about trends that we're seeing right now, and we're going to try to predict the future on specifically around financial services, and more specifically around the digital impact on financial services. And we're going to make some pretty specific predictions about where things are going that hopefully would be actionable for everybody. That's why I'm so excited about this topic. So why don't we jump in? All right, Peter, set this up for us. You basically threw some sticks in front of the oracle, sacrificed the goat. How did we come up with these predictions?
Words in a hat, or what was that thing that was popular maybe in the 90s? Magnetic poetry. No, in all seriousness. So it is. The foundation for all of these is our ongoing research, right? So we do not once a year say, let's make up predictions and they'll be totally, separate and discrete from our existing research. That would make no sense, and that's not how we do things. We sort of, we do a number of different predictions drafting. So we're each of us, a number of folks on my team, including folks in Asia Pac and Europe, around the globe. And then I lead a predictions session where what we're really doing is trying to really argue with each other, like a family around a kitchen table, about what is and is not right. And just to give you a sense, so in these 8 predictions, and Brian is correct that we're going to try to be as specific as we can be, given that we're speaking about an entire industry, right? And sometimes we're going to have to be somewhat broad. Because it will be a little different for a Wells Fargo than it will be for Merrill Lynch, and it'll be different for certainly the more regional banks and credit unions, et cetera. So it's going to vary. It's going to vary by where you sit in an organization. But the idea behind these, all of these should stand the test of saying by December 31st, 2016, this will have happened. That's the idea behind them. So they obviously have implications far beyond 2016. I'd say all of the ones we're going to talk about here have that. A lot of today's content and this presentation is based on a report we put out, a research report on predictions for 2016. A couple of those aren't in here. I mention them very briefly, like biometrics. We mention them because we think it bears noting that biometrics will move to a really table stakes. It is what customers will have already, many customers in developed markets have already come to expect, and it'll be established by December 31st, 2016. That one doesn't have as much. It has some long-term implications, certainly some security implications, but with the limited time we have here, we decided to zero in on the 8 that I think are the most impactful in the sort of medium and long term that are going to start to take place in 2016. So one last note I'll make here is that this is a carefully curated list, but it is by no means an exhaustive list. So there are some things. I'll mention another one just for an example. Bitcoin. We toyed around with making a prediction around the fact that Bitcoin would not have much serious impact in mainstream retail financial services in 2016, which I stand by. But that prediction is more complicated. And frankly, we can't include in our report or in this webinar everything that won't happen in 2016. That seems silly, and that would be a very long and boring webinar. So there's some things like that aren't in here. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this, and Brian and I will be talking throughout this. So some of those things that aren't directly in these slides might come up, which is great. But bear in mind that we obviously couldn't cover everything. That said, we did try to zero in on the most important 8 ways the digital financial services market will shift, will change over the course of the next, really a little less than 12 months at this point, that will have implications beyond that. So with that said, we'll jump right in. Number one is APIs. For those of you who had read the report, this is not just because Apigee invited me here today. In fact, there may be a correlation, but the cause is slightly different. We at Forrester have been quite bullish on APIs for a while. This building in the background here we use as an analogy for really Lloyd's building an effort to build something in which aspects of the plumbing, aspects of different functionality exist not necessarily in the central core systems, but actually are built outside in order to create flexibility. And APIs are just part of that recipe, just part of that strategy, but they're a really important part of that. So we're decidedly bullish on this. I spoke recently, and actually some quotes from me will be in Forbes out soon, talking about APIs as one of the most important tools that digital teams, digital executives at banks, as well as their partners in IT and BT, have at their disposal to really start moving on digital business transformation within banking. So I do stress a lot, and I'll say it right here, that APIs are a means to an end. They are not a strategy unto itself. No executive can say APIs is our new strategy. That would not yield great results, or if it did, it would be accidental and incidental. But they are a really crucial tool for accomplishing some of the things you need to get done in order to really transform your business and really in order to really take 2016 by the throat and start to really put yourselves in a position as banking organizations, as financial service institutions, or as partners to those for the future. So at Forrester, we talk about 4 types of APIs, and I want to, before we talk about these, this is a taxonomy that we think is useful for the executives that we work with. It is probably not a perfect taxonomy, and there is some overlap here, but we think it works pretty well for thinking about what types of APIs you need for what purposes, for what strategies, for what execution, etc. So number 1 is internal APIs, and we'll show you a couple of examples, an example of each of these in just a minute. Number 2 is B2B APIs. Number 3 are open APIs. And number 4 are product APIs. And I'll quickly say this. Brian, maybe you saw this, but when I built this slide, I built it to have the builds look what I said, because my wife said, it doesn't make any sense. Why don't you just build it linearly? And I said, no, it's like the Alien. If you remember the movie Alien, that's the way the credits build. I don't think anyone else sees it but me, but that was my idea there. Anyway, you can all write emails to my wife telling her that she's right or wrong if you want to be really nice. So a quick example of each of these. Let's go through. So, I imagine quite a few folks on the phone already have some sense of what each of these look like, but to give a little bit more specificity and to ground these in what we're really talking about, PayPal uses internal APIs aplenty, and their strategy is to continue to do so. Maybe more so certainly more so than the average financial services institution. An example of B2B, so Xignite is just one fintech firm that sells APIs to FIs and to other partners, etc. 2 banking providers, financial services providers, user companies in our parlance, BBVA and Mondo, both use open APIs. And I will say that this is often where we hear the most excitement, although also sometimes the most trepidation among the executives that we work with at insurers, banks, wealth management providers, etc. And then finally, actually from another user company, E-Trade is one of the few user companies, and they are certainly a national, well-known brand, at least in the U.S., but that is actually productizing their APIs and looking to really turn those into, a product. So we're starting to see this change. So this is a big part of 2016. I think 2016 we will look back and see as one of the turning points. It's not by no means at the beginning of the use of APIs, but I think we'll see a real big shift in the number of firms using them. I mean, most firms make some use of APIs, but relatively little. And then an even bigger shift in the degree to which they think about APIs as a really valuable tool for their digital strategy and their digital business transformation. By they, I mean executives and their teams at financial institutions.
Yeah,
so switching.
Yeah, right on. So
go ahead.
I have the privilege of flying around the world and talking to existing customers and prospective customers, a lot of IT execs and corporate execs about this stuff. And a common refrain I hear from the execs is, given that you're not starting from a green field, given that you've got a lot of investments, technology, business logic data you've built and bought over the previous decade, we all know that no organization is perfect. There's a certain amount of bureaucracy. I used to tell my lieutenants, it's a broken machine. Don't tell me it's a broken machine. Tell me how you're going to get output from the broken machine. And what I hear from a lot of CIOs, a lot of CDOs, even a lot of CMOs, is that the fastest way to move the needle at a big organization, at a bureaucracy, is simply to put a facade in front of all the guts. Put a facade in front of all the complicated stuff that's been built and bought over the years. And of course, the facade just happens to have the geeky name of API, but it's a very business impacting thing. And so, I talked to one lady in Australia. She said, I'm about to take a new role as a CIO, and the first thing I'm going to do is call you guys and talk about API management. And I said, well, the first day you ought to find your parking spot and where the restroom is and things like that. And she said, no, I need to. There's no way I could make a mark faster. There's no way I could make organizational change faster than using APIs. And I love the fact that you broke it out into the different types of APIs, because it's a really common misconception when I get off the plane somewhere. They'll say, oh, Brian, I'm a big fan. I read your books, watch your videos and things, but I don't care about Twitter. And it confused me for a while. Everybody kept saying this, like as though everyone in Silicon Valley works for Twitter. And then I realized, when people hear API, they think Twitter. And Twitter uses our development tools and things like that. But the vast majority of companies that I work with are not interested in that kind of program. They're interested in the internal silos and the mergers and acquisition problems that they have, the fractured brand. They're worried about onboarding new partners and new developer segments and getting new customer segments. It's the B2B, it's the product, it's the internal stuff. So I really love that you called that out. Obviously, here at Apigee, we are the API company. It's right there in our name. So we take this. This is near and dear to our hearts. So thank you for making that number one.
Of course, yeah. And if you read the research report, this is not just me putting this out here because of where we are. This is front and center in our, not just in our view in what firms will start to move, but it's front and center in our research. So yes, and I'll add one more comment, which is you said there's no faster way. I think that's right. Speed is not the only variable. It's not the only. It certainly shouldn't be the only KPI for the executives we worked at. But we are seeing, we Forrester have written a report around blueprints, the blueprint for the customer-obsessed organization or company. And when we talk about customer obsession, we often talk about a transition from perfect to fast. And it's one of the areas where established firms have to learn some lessons from startups. They neither can nor should emulate startups exactly, but they can learn some of the lessons around, MVPs and things like that, and APIs can help accomplish that. So yes. So moving on. I said switching gears, but that's not even quite true, because mobile is an area where APIs play a big role. What I'm going to do here, though, is zero in on mobile behaviors from the customer standpoint and mobile strategy from the wealth management, banking, financial services, insurance perspective. So our prediction here is that the mobile mind shift, that's Forrester's terminology, whether you want to call it that or not, I think we all share a sensibility around how much mobile is changing everything. And our view is that we'll continue to reshape behaviors, expectations, largely among end users. It certainly plays a role in other areas and other markets as well, but that's where it's the brunt of it is often most felt. And we think that will continue in 2016. And in some sense, this is kind of a duh, but I think it's hard to understate. It also gets into, I speak a lot about how, although a lot has changed in the past 5 years, we are still by our research, according to our research, sort of by our modeling, we're still in sort of the end of the early stages of mobile disruption. So yes, aspects of mobile adoption in the general consumer behaviors are pretty strong at this point, right? They're pretty widespread, they're pretty common, people are using them frequently, et cetera. But a lot of the sort of downstream impact has still yet to be felt, especially in financial services. So there are a number of, we have about two, in my estimation, when we do our modeling, we consider there to be sort of two generations of mobile bankers, and mobile wealth management is pretty similar, mobile insurance parallel to that as well. But there's still a lot of folks, the majority in most markets, that haven't adopted mobile as their regular number one touch point, the hub of their relationship with the bank, the wealth management firm, the insurer, et cetera. So we're going to continue to see that have an impact. Very quickly, I want to talk about what our definition of the mobile mind shift is. We define it as the expectation that I, the customer, the end user, the business client, can get what I want in my immediate context, and that is underlined, bolded, and italicized intentionally, and moments of need. And we'll talk about moments in just a moment, pun unfortunately not intended, in a few seconds. But first I want to talk about this idea of context. Context is the number one driver of mobile success. It's the number one driver of the shifts in mobile behavior as well. We define context as everything that you as an institution, along with your partners, know about a customer or prospect at the point of engagement. And we mean everything, right? So the big one right now that continues to be the most powerful driver of context, and as a result, often a driver of great customer experiences within mobile, is location. But we're talking about much bigger than that, right? Past behavior, predicted emotional states, predicted future behavior, et cetera, et cetera. Weather, in some cases, makes a big difference, so not just location, but where, that element of it, right? So when you think about Bank Amerideals and other geolocation-based offers, those things are greatly enhanced by better use of context. So we're seeing that shift take place. It's not quite as fast as customers' expectations, but we're seeing some really great work there, and I'll show you an example of that when we talk about mobile moments in just 2 slides. To break down what we mean a little bit, I'll talk about, this is sort of our quick little illustration of breaking down the mobile mind shift. For a long time, there were devices, and then there were apps, right? So devices, basically, there was some mobile devices, and there was BlackBerry, which had sort of 2 apps, you could argue. And then there really was the iPhone that changed everything. And for a long time, we thought about these as being the main intersection of what mobile was, of what the shift was going on in mobile, right? There's an app for that, is the term that everyone threw around. What we saw, though, was that really what was going on was in the mind of the customer, of the consumers, of us as business people, as well as the folks we serve, the folks we're trying to win and engage and retain. There is a shift happening within their mind, within their mindset. So ultimately, that means that companies are interacting, are in the mix, and are seeing the impact of this mobile mind shift. It ultimately means that they need to be thinking about what we call the 3 Ps for alliterative purposes, but platforms, processes, people. You'll see me later talk about back-end initiatives among financial services providers, and a big shift to really re-engineering, in the language of most of our clients, a lot of their back-end platforms, processes, people, their data infrastructure, et cetera. So a lot of this comes down to moments, what we call the mobile moment, which is that moment when I expect to be served in my context immediately within that moment, and like I said, in context. One that I use as an example, just because I think it's a really nice example. It was born out of great customer journey mapping and then really thoughtful engineering and then thoughtful front-end design as well as customer experience design, and that is from Discover. Discover does a lot of things well, not everything, but a lot of things really well. They realized there was this key mobile moment in their cardholders' lives. And that is that moment when maybe I was out the night before, I wake up in the morning, and my card isn't where I keep it, in my wallet or in my money clip or on my bedside table or maybe in my back pocket or whatever it may be. And I don't know that's lost. I don't know that's stolen, but I do know that I don't have it. And I don't know what that means. I as the customer, as the cardholder. So they invented this freeze, really nice, seemingly small but powerful innovation, which enables you to momentarily or for the time being freeze that card so that card can't be used to make transactions, but it does not necessitate reporting fraud, reporting it lost, initiating a new card, which can take much longer than any customer feels like dealing with, at which point they won't be using the card, which is the main point of Discover. So, it was this really specific pain point, and it's really at one moment. It's that moment when you can take out your phone or as we move into micro moments, right, emerging touch points like a smart TV or a wearable, and be able to initiate this. And it's a really nice, in my view, use of customer journey mapping, mobile moments, and really digital business design at its best. So mobile's changing everything. But, and I think this is really important, and it's another, it's hard to understate how big mobile is. It's also easy to misunderstand how mobile is changing, folks, because while it's been very powerful over the last few years, there's still a lot of wariness about mobile. So this is some data that Forrester has about how comfortable, how secure consumers, and this is U.S. consumers, although we see clear parallels, similar structure to this data, even if it's not the exact same data points, data numbers, in other developed markets. And that is how secure they feel making purchases via different devices, so PC, tablet, smartphone. Now, some of this is logical. There are some security concerns via tablet and smartphone, but a lot of it is what we call perceived security. So this perception that mobile is somehow unsafe, even if you're actually using it to, tap the same servers, even if you're using the same Wi-Fi network, whatever it may be. What this is driving brings me to my next prediction, which is cross-channel experiences, cross-channel interactions with, we say banks here, but banks are, I would argue, yes, are at the forefront. That's why we have that word here. But long-term, it has impact, and even in 2016, it has some impact on certainly insurance, but also wealth management, credit cards, and other aspects of financial services. The rest of them a little bit delayed on the impact for sure. And so, at the risk of over-defining or using too many definitions in this presentation, I want to again give you our definition. You don't have to use ours, but we think this works pretty well. For cross-channel or cross-touchpoint, we use those words for now somewhat interchangeably. There is a distinction, but I would say that for right now, we think about them as often quite similar, right? So one is a subset of the other. Anyway, how we define cross-channel or cross-touchpoint is any instance in which a customer or prospect, so this is both sales and service, moves from one touch point to another in order to when completing an objective. So this is really important because I'll use a banking example for a moment. A customer who pays a bill online and 5 days or even 5 minutes later walks into a branch to talk about a mortgage or retirement planning or their taxes or something like that, that is a multi-channel customer. Hopefully there is some omni-channel and multi-channel strategy that is able to serve that customer very well and engage that customer well, but that is not a cross-channel interaction. In contrast, a customer who is out looking for a house and looking to buy opens up a mobile app, either from a provider or not, takes a little calculator, let's say in this case it's from a provider's own app, it takes a little mortgage calculator to see what they can afford, and then wants to be able to talk to someone in person because they feel more comfortable with that, as evidenced by the data we saw just a few slides ago, is then able to make an appointment, go into the branch and talk to someone. The thing about cross-channel is this, and you'll hear me say the same thing about the next topic that we'll start in the next slide, is expectations are still quite low when it comes to cross-channel, cross-touchpoint financial services interactions. But that's going to change beginning in 2016. By December 31st, it won't have transformed completely. It won't be flipped, but expectations are rising. So while today customers might say, it's okay that I was on your website looking for something, trying to, complete some sort of task. I wasn't able to, so I called you, and when I called you, I had to give you my username. I had to tell you my phone password. I had to then tell you again what the problem I was having was. Then we went through all the steps together. Right now, they may not love it. They might complain about how long it took, but they don't see it as a broken experience, with a few really problematic experiences and exceptions. That's going to change. Beginning in 2016 and impacting multiple markets thereafter, customers' expectations are going to rise. A lot of it driven by other industries. Retail and travel are number one. We'll talk about that actually again in the next topic, shared finances. But that's being driven by other experiences they have with other industries.
Yeah. So Peter, on this, on your previous two points, it brings up something that I hear all the time as I fly around the world. People will say, "Hey, Brian, this all sounds good. We'd love to do digital transformation. We'd love to do more mobile, maybe even social. We'd love to be on more devices, more channels. This all sounds really exciting, But, we're a little conservative, or we've got a lot of technology debt, we've got bigger things on our plate, and it's just too early for us. And what I always have to say to them, I consider myself something of a corporate therapist, is I have to look at them and say, you don't get the choice of doing business in 2016. You're doing business in 2016, and therefore it's not too early. If anything, it's getting on the late side, knowing how long it usually takes to execute at the enterprise level, execute a brand new program. So I love that those two go ahead.
I was going to say, especially when you're integrating, connecting, in some places ripping and replacing systems that go across channels, across silos. So you're absolutely right. Yeah. I was going to add to that. So say that you and I haven't talked about this, but when we do our predictions brainstorming at Forrester for this report, and other teams I know do similar things, we have our own sort of taxonomy. I won't bore everyone with all the different labels we put on different predictions, but we talk about some of them as inevitabilities, which means it doesn't matter what our clients do. Even if our clients all ignore this problem, it will still rear its ugly head. That's not true for all of them, right? So actually later on we'll talk about real-time transactions. It wouldn't work forever, but as an industry, or as multiple industries, financial services could slow the impact of this, but they couldn't stop it long-term, but they could slow it and change it. Then there's other things like cross-channel behavior that they can't. As to your point, you don't get to choose. Some of these things you don't get to choose, and this is a great example of it. So I agree with you 100%. So switching, I would argue that this is another, to use your terminology, you don't get to choose whether or not shared finances happen. You do, I guess, get to choose whether or not you play in this market, whether you play in this, whether you look at this as an opportunity or wait and see, and that's fine. But our view is that financial service institutions and disruptors, and we'll see who gets there first, will push into the shared finances market. So again, this is one where definition really, I think, adds a lot of value, so I'm going to include one here. Our definition of shared finances is the following. Any situation in which a person, a consumer, acts as an observer of, partner in, or a proxy for another person's finances. So again, that's sort of three-pronged, and it's an or, it's any of these, observer of, partner in, or proxy for. One thing that's interesting about shared finances is a lot of the work I do, and I'm sure, Brian, for you, a lot of the work you end up doing is you're talking to different folks. A lot of it is about change driven by technological forces. There's other factors, right? But even the mobile mind shift is driven, the catalyst for it was a big shift in technology. Shared finances, it has big technology implications, and it has big implications for digital strategy at financial services companies. But what's driving it really are demographic forces and macroeconomic forces. So what we're seeing is things like people living longer, which is a wonderful thing, but it means that sometimes folks are living past their ability to manage their own finances. And that means that sometimes their children or grandchildren or someone else they're close with is helping them to manage their finances, often using digital touch points and digital interactions. But financial services providers aren't doing much to really support that. With good reason, right? They've got a lot on their plate, so I'm not here to tisk, but we're seeing this market, this opportunity grow. There's other things. Children are being dependent for longer, right? They have those either student loan debts or they don't go to college and they stick around the house. Either way, we're seeing this as a reality of people's lives. Not a bad thing, but it means that their financial lives are becoming more complicated. So we also see things, blended families and divorce rates changing a lot around really just the complexity of people's interpersonal financial relationships, which is a mouthful, but it really is, again, this is one where it's sort of sneaking up on us collectively as a set of industries. But my view is that 2016 will start to see, and I think probably disruptors will do a better job early. But I will say there's one sort of interesting little slice of the financial services industry, which is private banking, that actually does this very well. They don't have digital enablement of this down pat by any means, but they do a really good job of it in traditional channels, right? So they're offline. So if you're a billionaire and you want to talk to your private bank or your family trust, about giving specific access to your real estate attorney versus your tax attorney versus your stepson versus your daughter, or your ex-wife and your new wife or husband. They're pretty good at enabling that kind of tiered access, delegation, whatever you want to call it. So we're going to see this continue to drive some shift. Again, I would also argue that retail and travel, especially, both of those in different ways, are changing the game here a little bit. So JetBlue now lets families pool points, right? In contrast, one of the biggest hotel chains in the world and hotel brands that I'm actually a fan of, but I won't name because I'm criticizing them here. There is no way. So my wife and I both have their loyalty. And I called once and said, can we put it on mine instead? And they said, no, there's no way to pool them in any way or to even acknowledge that you're married. So even though I'm married, even though we pay for each other, we can pay for each other's hotel rooms, there's no way to pool that. So we're seeing still some positives and some negatives in other markets, but I think disruptors, fintech, and other industries will start to shift this. Prediction number 5. So this is one that I sort of, it's kind of an umbrella one. It's a bit broad, but it's still, I think, really important. When we speak to our executives at our different clients, at banks, wealth management firms, et cetera, the last couple of years, we've heard a lot about front-end design, often trying to catch up with what had happened in the previous years before that, the 2 or 3 years before that, in mobile design, in online, sort of shift in online, tablet, responsive design, things like that. Which all of those have back-end implications, and certainly, financial institutions have not been ignoring the back end for the past 3 years. But we're going to see a proportional shift, pretty sizable one, to back-end initiatives. This means a number of things. So some of this is core systems, legacy systems, some rip and replace stuff like that, but some of it's using things like internal APIs to, optimize or create more efficiencies inside your own systems, et cetera. Again, I said this earlier. We said this specifically about mobile earlier, but it has, frankly, it's evidence. The evidence is clear that it's across all digital touchpoints and in multi-channel and cross-channel efforts, the 3 Ps, right? So it's platforms, processes, and people. We've seen this happen. We worked with a financial institution that enabled a big shift in how they could how they could enable and support customers during mortgage application and onboarding. What they hadn't done, though, is dealt with the fact that their branches, their offices, and their people inside those branches and offices had not been prepared for that. So the processes were still paper-based inside the branch, inside the office. The people had not been trained on those new systems. They'd been told that they exist and given, access to them a month in advance, but they really hadn't been, to use the term we use, engineered around that. And so we think we're going to see a big shift there. Next one, we argued about this. Go ahead, Brian.
If I could just mention, because I've got the get out of jail free card as a lifelong IT executive looking at these kind of back end projects. One of the things I've noticed is that again, you don't have a magic button. It's 2016. You're doing business in this climate, in this context. You can't magically pause the world while you re-engineer your back-end systems or pay off your technology debt, whatever the case may be. One thing I've noticed is that what we talked about, the first couple points where we talked about putting up a facade, putting up APIs, that is a great way, by the way, to buy yourself the time to fix your back-end systems, to modernize. I mean, fix is a strong word, but the life cycle of an enterprise piece of software is 3 to 4 years. So in any given quarter, there's going to be some that need to be refreshed. If you've thrown up a scaffolding out front, which means every other department, every other line of business, every other partner, every customer, every app just hits this facade, which is almost aspirational. Like, here's what we want to be. Here's how self-service and context-driven, real-time we want to be. And don't worry about the man behind the curtain here. We're fixing those systems in the back, and nobody really needs to know which vendors we're using, which naming conventions we're using. I find that the facades really buy you that time because, again, nobody has the magic pause button. I can't just say, okay, everybody, competitors, disruptors, everybody just wait while I fix this stuff. It'll take me about 18 months. That's kind of an unrealistic view of the world.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll say one more thing. It can, if you do it right, it can achieve is basically demonstrating the value of a new XYZ, right? Or a shift, a transformation of, or sometimes just the existence of X system or X offering, whatever it may be. And really what I'm talking about there is executive or higher up buy-in, right? So someone who can champion it and frankly ultimately get budget for it, that can be a powerful tool there. So I agree 100%. And it really is for firms of all size. We work with one of the biggest banks. They are in a couple of developed markets. They're ultimately global. And they spent the last 4.5 years completely re-engineering their back-end data infrastructure. Really, building new data centers. They have an approach that is they use the word modular. That is a huge effort, right? In the meantime, what they had to do, their IT executives and their BT executives had to use some fixes, some shorter-term fixes in order to keep things going, run the business for 2016, for 2015, and into 2017 while that's taking place. So, yeah, absolutely, great point. So the next prediction is about real-time, and as I was starting to say, this is one that we internally, me and my team, argued about. And I think, in some sense, so yes, the real-time goes prime time, has a nice catchiness to it. We almost changed it because we thought, well, will it really? And then we said, yeah. What we mean is not that it will be widespread in the sense that everyone and their grandmother will be using it for most of their transactions and payments. Certainly we don't mean that real-time analytics and real-time marketing will be the norm at every single financial institution, by no means. What we mean, though, is that the promise of real-time data, which then enables real-time analytics, real-time transactions, real-time payments, will come to fruition in 2016. It's already starting to see that, right? As one example that we show you here, this is BBVA partnering with Duola, right, through an API. So we believe that will start to take place on the supply side, so within the financial institutions in 2016, and then have a pretty big impact on customers' expectations thereafter. It will not be that everything will be real-time by December 31st, 2016. Far from it. Rather, that real-time will be a reality for a range of different offerings, right? And that includes marketing implications, analytics implications, and payments, et cetera. So, and this, by the way, has some impact on a lot of other customer experience aspects of financial lives of consumers and businesses and frankly, even your partners, and so that's going to make a big difference. The next one, so we phrased it this way in our report and based on our research, and I don't think it's the most clever thing in the world, but I think it really is. Both aspects of this prediction are important to recognize. One is that customers will demand more personalization. We're already seeing that in the early stages of 2016. A couple of financial institutions that we work with are seeing this. But consumers don't realize it. What I mean by that is not just, so certainly they don't very often use the term personalization, and if they did, they may not be using it correctly. I'll talk about that in a second. But not only just that, they don't even notice. It's really much more, sort of to think about it in economics or even sort of evolutionary biological terms. It is more that the kinds of experiences that customers have that make them more engaged, stickier, more likely to stay or spend their next dollar with you or move more of their portfolio to you. The kind of experience that drive that are the ones that are more personalized, even if a customer doesn't notice it. So I'll show you in a moment some examples of ones that are fine, but not truly embracing the power of context, everything you know about the customer at the point of engagement, really embracing the power of personalization. We'll see one that does a better job of that in a couple slides as well. But at the heart of this is really just that we're going to see customers making decisions, whether they realize it or not, based on better use of context and better personalized offerings. So this is one that is going to have a big impact across all industries. Financial services, what's interesting is you as financial institutions and or their partners are really intimately aware of a lot about the customer, right? So when we say context is everything you know about the customer, you know a lot. So I'll show you my example that's just okay here. So this is from Chase, which again, they do some great stuff, and they've actually redesigned this site at the time. This is a little bit old, but still I think telling about where personalization has generally been for the past really 5 to 7 years, is little bits of personalization, right? So they said, happy birthday, right? And it was on this person's birthday. This is during our Forrester does digital banking benchmarks and website reviews, et cetera. And so it's a happy birthday to the person. It was on their birthday, but it offered nothing else, right? And so, that's nice that the birthday is there. But honestly, the answer is you should know it's my birthday. You're my bank. You're my financial. You have all my money. The idea that the most you know about me is what day my birthday falls on is really, it's the bare minimum of what you could know. And then in terms of the messaging and, this is an opportunity to maybe say, and we've seen some firms do this. I don't have time to give you, we have an example from USAA next that also does this part of it well. But maybe get a chance to say, hey, as you enter the new year for yourself, maybe take a moment to think about how you could use your finances better, right? So in sort of embed it or weave it into some digital money management, some personal financial management opportunities. I say, and Brian, I think I mentioned this to you when we were talking a few weeks ago. I don't know how widespread this place is, but there's a Mexican sort of chain restaurant around America, around the U.S. called not Mexicali, apparently. Margaritas. I'm an idiot. Anyway, Margaritas sends you a birthday card, a little postcard in the mail. They give you a $5 coupon. The idea that a chain Mexican restaurant's doing a better job of personalizing my experience than my bank or my financial institution is a bit troubling. Now, I don't want to be overly harsh on Chase here. I don't think this is a bad thing to present. I just think we want to be thinking about how to take it further, right? I say the same thing about avatars on mobile apps, which we're seeing more and more of. There is nothing wrong with that. That's a little bit more customization. But there's nothing wrong with that, but it isn't really sinking your teeth into what context can offer and what personalization really can be in the digital space and through digital touchpoints. The little bit better example, I would say much better. So USAA, which does a great job of really test and learn. So Forrester has written a lot recently, actually in the last, really for a few years now, about taking an iterative test and learn, and the learn part's really important and often forgotten, but a test and learn approach to digital strategy for financial institutions, really for companies of all stripes. And so, USAA, I would argue, is one of the best at it. And USAA has rolled out a separate app called the Savings Coach app. They do this a lot. They do a really good job of testing things out, taking the best parts of it, and putting it back into their main customer app, which is a fat app that really has a lot of functionality, a lot of different great digital experiences, mobile experiences within it. So this actually reaches in, uses context, uses everything right? So it says, I've looked around your spending using our debit cards and credit cards, and I can tell you how much you spend on coffee. I can't quite see. This is very small on my screen, so I can't see exactly what screenshots I have here. But basically it says, this is how much you're spending on coffee. It's gamified. It's gamified a little bit. Then you guess, and then it makes a suggestion that if you do this much, if you take this activity, you can save this amount overall. And then it lets you actually take action, which is something, a level of digital money management that most firms aren't really doing, which lets you immediately say, I'll actually set up a savings account and move all the money I save from buying one less coffee a day or one less coffee a week into that savings account, right? We've seen this in some other spaces, right? But I'd say USA does one of the best jobs of really making it about using the context of past behavior and where that person is, because you can make it so that you're actually reminded when you're buying the coffee, et cetera. So it's a really nice use of personalization. Even this, I think, can be taken further, and I think it will, from USAA and from other leading firms that are taking this iterative approach. But something we like to see.
So our last tangential to this, Peter, is as I fly around the world, I hear a bunch of executives telling me that they need big data. Like, I need big data. And I'm thinking, nobody needs big data. Nobody's getting comped on having big data. When you tell me you need big data, right, that's just more data to store. Queries could take longer because you've got a lot more data stored. I think what you mean is fast contextual data, that you want your employees and your partners and your customers to have fast contextual responses. We know that speed of response is probably most indicative of user satisfaction with an application. And context is, if I'm picking up the trend correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, 3 or 4 of these points have really swirled around the idea of context, which is becoming ever more important. Anecdotally, when I had first joined Apigee, and I was on all the different social networks, and I had my Apigee laptop and my personal laptop and my iPhone and my iPad and all these things. When I got an email or an IM message, my entire office shook. Like I was alerted on 17 different channels about the same thing. When I travel a lot, and if I don't check in with Facebook in about 18 hours, they start getting really nervous, and they start hitting me on every single device, every single channel I have, and I'm thinking, I'm the same person. You only need to hit me in my current context. So think about where I might be. Yeah, go.
And ultimately, it shouldn't be on the customer. So customization is, so by the way, we at Forrester, and this is pretty common, it's not we use customization to describe when a consumer or the end user is making choices about personalizing or tailoring the experience to themselves when they're taking the initiative to do that or being able to do that. Personalization is when the company or a third party and the partner is tailoring the experience to the customer without the need for them to move the widgets around or taste it. And that's ultimately where we want to get. So what you're talking about when your whole office shifts, your financial institution should, and there's great analytics tools that can help you do this, that use that context to really support you, in the touch point you want, at the time you want, in the way you want. So you're absolutely right, and you're not reading it wrong. And I would actually say, so it's funny you mentioned that context is driving a lot of these and is really a force, both driving and ultimately, hopefully, being used by financial institutions across these. That's true, and frankly, when we first started talking about context Forrester, it was specific to mobile. What we've seen is that, much like mobile has been a catalyst for a wider shift in digital expectations and digital behavior among consumers and users and us as end users, mobile has likewise been a catalyst for a shift in digital business strategy, right? So the idea of context as only exclusive to mobile is no longer true, and that's been true for about 2 years, but really coming to a head in the last 6 months, and continue to do so. So yeah. So our final prediction, and then I don't know if we have some Q&A. I certainly I think we had a couple, but so bank executives will make better use of analytics. So this might sound a little bit obvious again. I will be blunt, and this is specific to banks, so wealth management and insurers have some needs here, too, that they need to shore up. Our work, though, it's surprising to me when you compare executives of financial institutions to retailers, travel companies, as well as best-in-class firms in some other areas like B2B, even aspects of healthcare. Healthcare in certainly areas of healthcare are way behind. But while financial institutions have a wealth of data, right, to your point, they say they need big data. They're getting more and more data all the time. They also don't have a lack of analytics talent, right? So it is not that, almost every digital team we talk to has either a analytics or measurement center of excellence they can work with, or more commonly, they have their own analytics professionals within their team, embedded within their team. What I'm sad to report, though, is that when we speak to the executives, the strategists, the folks making the decisions, they're using those analytics for reporting, for monthly check-ins and things like that. They're not using them to drive customer insights and better customer personalization and use of context. And they're also not really having analytics and thoughtful measurement drive business decisions. Now, sometimes you have to take a leap, right? Apple was king of this and continues to be king of this. You don't just listen to whatever your customers want next, then you'll build just a smaller, disk band. That said, making data-based decisions, and maybe as importantly, putting measurement in place, analytics and measurement in place at the start of initiatives rather than as an afterthought, is going to be something we'll see, thankfully, more and more of, and that will ultimately yield a lot more, hopefully, success in beyond 2016 across these other areas. So quickly, we have 3 takeaways, and since we've got about 9 minutes left, I'll go through these relatively quickly so we have more than 5 minutes for Q&A. So those of you listening, please feel free to ask a question. So while you're doing that, I'll quickly say, so executive financial providers will spend more and expect more of APIs, or spend more on and expect more of, This is at the front of our deck. It's at the forefront of our research and our predictions report. It will have implications that are much bigger than just IT, but certainly have a lot of implications around the way business teams work with their IT partners, their BT partners. It's got to have a lot of internal organizational impact. Number 2, mobile will continue to change everything. And, apologies, I didn't realize there were 2 builds. APIs are a means, not an end. API is not a strategy unto itself. I liken this, so APIs are much more valuable than QR codes. But similarly, I remember a colleague of mine saying, no one should ever say that QR codes are their strategy, right? That's a fundamental misunderstanding of, well, frankly, lots of things, including what QR codes can do. So obviously APIs are much more powerful as a tool than that, but they are a means to an end. They are not the strategy. You need to have an API management strategy. You need to be thinking about what your strategy, how it aligns with your technology strategy and your API approach, working with your developers, etc. But they're not a strategy unto themselves. Mobile will continue to play a role in strategy as well as affecting consumers' lives. Like I said just a few minutes ago, in response to you, Brian, mobile has become a catalyst for wider change, not just in the markets, but also on the business side, on the supply side, for business transformation, business change, transformation. Apps and sites will act as catalysts, connective tissue. So we talked earlier about cross-channel, cross-touchpoint financial services interactions. Mobile is often the first touchpoint a customer goes to or a prospect goes to, but it is rarely the only touchpoint they use. So mobile is often a key part of guiding customers and helping them move and really take the multi-channel, cross-channel journey, making that as seamless as possible. We sometimes say when we're talking about cross-channel journey mapping, the aim is seamless, even though that will never happen, or at least it won't happen in the foreseeable future. And firms will take an iterative approach. So this is the foundation for a lot of what we've talked about. More firms will really embrace agile is a term that's used a lot. It has some specific development implications, but we also are bullish on agile. But this sort of more dynamic, a shift from perfect to fast, a shift to cross-functional teams that are really taking an iterative approach to initiatives, we're going to see that more and more. And this is true, we've found this in our work. We've written 2 case studies, one on CaixaBank and one on BBVA, that if you get a chance, I would urge you to read, that really talk about the lesson we've learned from them, and from folks like USAA, and discover that at the forefront of digital strategy is that testing, learning, and then repeating, right? Rinse, iterate and do it again. Iterate and iterate and iterate again. Matters more than any one strategy. And budget allocating for that, right? So that's a big part of this. When I spoke for Apigee, not too long ago, I was talking to someone who said that they used to have a colleague who wore, in the IT department, of course, that walked around with a T-shirt that just said, version 2 is a lie. And don't let that be true at your organization or at the organizations that you partner with and collaborate with, right? Make sure that your initiatives and the initiatives that you work on are budgeted in a way that there is an iterative process in place. There is plans, not just a hope for version 2, but plans that are actually allocated, or budget that's allocated for version 2. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Brian. I want to say, first of all, thank you to all of you and to Brian and Shreya and Apigee for having me. And I'll hand it back to you, Brian.
Okay, thanks so much, Peter. That was every bit as predictive as I hoped it would be. What I liked about this is that I see a lot of vague predictions, the January, February of every year. Things will move faster. Things will change. These are not actionable predictions. They're like the ones I get in my fortune cookies that aren't really predictions at all. And I want to know tomorrow at 4 p.m. duck. Like that's a good fortune for me. These are pretty actionable, and I would think and hope that the folks listening not only appreciate the data and all the rigor that went into making these predictions, but would now be thinking about, okay, so how do I benefit from these predictions? How can I take the next steps? And of course, that's the tricky part. Knowing this information is step one, and now figuring out how to apply it in your organization and how to get started is the next step. I can tell you from years of experience working with customers here in California, is that the mistakes you don't want to make are treat this like a legacy program and do 2 years of analysis paralysis. The iterative approach that Peter just mentioned is key. Don't do something small and off to the side. This is critical. This is how we do business in 2016. Make sure that whatever you test the waters with on digital and your transformation, make sure that it matters. Make sure there's a real consequence for success or failure. And then I'm sure Peter or I would be happy to answer any questions that we didn't get time to address today. Just reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help you get started on your journey. So with that being said, I want to thank Peter so much for coming up with these great predictions, and thank you all for joining us. We love talking about digital and talking about business transformation, and we thank you so much for joining us once again, and we hope that you'll join us for the next one. Have a great day, everyone.